This is the Henry's Child Podcast. Am I crazy? Or am I just raving?
Hey guys, Tom here. Today I have a very special treat in that I was able to sit down at Mazinga Studios with Daniel Riddle of King Black Acid. This guy is legendary, and I had heard his name throughout many different circles and under many different circumstances, and they were like, man, you've got to get this dude on your podcast. He is intriguing, he's very cool, and he's done a ton of awesome music throughout the decades. And it's true, Daniel was really awesome. And I got to admit, you guys, this was way outside of my comfort zone because I didn't really know him. I was kind of going off to his studio to record. And as it ended up, it was great. Daniel was very accommodating. He's a super sharp, intelligent guy and just a really awesome person in general. And man, I'll tell you what, after this, I'd love to hang out with him even more. So please take this moment to enjoy my conversation with Daniel Riddle of King Black Acid. Daniel, thanks for taking the time and sitting down with me to talk about some music.
Yeah, thank you.
That's about as formal as I can get. But I'm sitting here in Daniel's studio at his house in Portland, Oregon, and it is amazing to see what King Black Acid records and does all kinds of stuff. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, welcome. We record here, we rehearse here, and I record other bands here as well.
How often does your band rehearse?
Let's see. On average, we rehearse about once a week, and when we have shows coming up, then we cram more sessions in. So we'll get into maybe 3, depending on how much work we need to do to get ready for the stage so that we can really deliver the goods.
Which may depend on where you're playing, too.
Yeah, not so much where we're playing, but if we've got new players, if we've got new material we're trying to work in, there's just certain level of excellence that we know when we're hitting it. And if we are, we're like, oh, let's back down to 1 practice a week. We know we got this. Let's just maintain this level. And other times we're like, shit, we need to ramp this up. So let's do that.
Yeah, we're the same way. So we rehearse on Sundays in Salem because we're spread all throughout the state. Mm-hmm. So I have a guy in Eugene, a fellow in Lebanon, and Corvallis, and me and the drummer live in Portland. So it's kind of this sort of converging in Salem.
Regional.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So speaking of regional, there was a little bit of a legend going around about Hitting Birth. Now you were in Hitting Birth, right?
Yes.
I'm assuming Hitting Birth probably wasn't your first band.
No, it wasn't. But I started Hitting Birth when I moved here in late 1988.
88, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And where'd you move from?
The San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, okay. You're a Bay Area boy first, huh?
Yeah. And I had a band down there called the Indigo Zeros. And we had put out a record. It was coming out on vinyl. And we needed somewhere to call home base because San Francisco was not happening. It was too hard to get shows down there. It was too hard to get people interested in music. You know, Portland seemed like a decent place, and nobody really knew much about it.
I'm with you. It was kind of mysterious at that time.
Oh, yeah. It was just a tiny little speck on the I-5 corridor.
So true.
So I just I literally threw a dart at a map on the wall, and it landed right near Portland. And I was like, that's where we're going. That's how it happened.
Wow, cool. So when you moved up from the Bay Area, did everybody come with you? And the whole sort of band moved up and had the communal?
Yeah. First I came up, then right about the same time, one of my roommates came up because she had family up here. Her grandparents lived here. And then my bandmates came up, my girlfriend came up, and then their friends, some of our friends and crew came up. By the end of the year, it was probably about 30 or 40 people from the city, from our scene.
San Francisco, sure.
Yeah, a lot of people came up.
Carrie
from Jollymon.
Yeah, Carrie Rich, we were talking about it today, and he said that Hitting Birth was like a cosmic circus that you brought up here, Indigo
Zeros.
Indigo Zeros, Okay, I need to remember that
Yeah.
one. Indigo Zeros. How did that morph into Hitting Birth, and then how did that become the Cosmic Circus?
They didn't really morph into each other so much. They were kind of both autonomous projects. Indigo Zeros was a sort of post-punk power pop. So we were all like kids that grew up in the hardcore scene in San Francisco, seeing shows like the Dead Kennedys and
So you probably went to the Gilman.
I did a little bit at the beginning of the Gilman, but I was in the generation sort of before the Gilman. So we went to the Mab and the On Broadway and the Stone and the Keystone Berkeley and Keystone San Francisco and so shows at the Vats and the Farm sort of started up at the end of that run. And when those places died out, we really kind of stopped going to punk shows. There's a whole culture phenomena that happened at the time. Hardcore was really big in the early 80s. And then the sort of Nazi punk thing happened. And then all the jocks that would normally follow us around high school yelling, "Whip it good, Devo," and like spitting in our hair, they started showing up at the punk shows and like punching girls and creating chaos and violence. And they brought this sort of Nazi culture in with them, this sort of militant thing.
Yikes.
And it just blew the punk scene apart. And so we all scattered into sort of what I would consider a post-punk or a sort of subterranean rock, where we were mixing things like death rock, glam rock, punk rock, hardcore, new romantic stuff, and creating new genres. So the Indigo Zeros were part of that. And we toured and played shows with bands like Faith No More and Danzig, stuff like that. And later on, when we moved up here, people started calling that music, they called it power pop for a while, and then they started calling it grunge music.
Okay.
So the Indigo Zeros was that style of that mix of pop and punk and rock and a little bit of glam and a little bit, when I was waiting for the records to be pressed, a 12-inch vinyl.
It takes a while.
That's what you did back then. And it was our first record. And while I was waiting for that, and I was waiting for my bandmates to move up here, I was hanging out at an apartment building in Northwest Portland here where I lived, called The Lawn. And I was smoking a bunch of weed that I had brought up with me from the city, from Cali. Some dude who was hanging out next door smelled all the weed smoke coming from under the door. And he came over and he knocked on the door and he very cleverly asked me if he could borrow any rolling papers. Well, he didn't even have any weed. He just smelled the weed and he was looking for an icebreaker. And next thing you know, I'm inviting him in and we're getting high and talking about music and stuff. And his name was Steve Spirit. And we became fast friends right away, best friends. And we talked about music and he's like, "Dude, we should start a fucking band together, man, and do weird shit." And so we did. I went over to his place and he was already doing a project. I can't remember what it was called, but they had an electrified shopping cart and it was like he would sort of read poetry and scream and shout. And then they had this electrified shopping cart and they would make noises and bang on stuff. And so I was a drummer in the Indigo Zeros. That was my role in the band.
Okay.
So when I came into it, I brought in a percussive element, and then we brought in another cat at the same time. We decided, wow, this is very different than what was happening before. It needed a name, and we decided on Hitting Birth. I think we were drinking mushroom tea, and somehow that name made sense to us because it was just weird enough, and it seemed like.
Band names are kind of like that.
Yeah, it seemed psychedelic and weird, and we're like, yes, let's do that. So that band started up and started playing shows before my other band even got here, before the Zeros got here. So at some point, both bands were playing. So, like, for instance, we'd do a rock and shop. Hitting Birth would play in the daytime, and then the Zeros would play at nighttime. And we'd do a show at Satyricon for Halloween, and both bands would play. So I'd finish one set, and then maybe there'd be a band in between us, and then the other band would go on. And at some point, Hitting Birth started to become more musical and become more popular, and more dancers on stage, and just more of a fucking shit show. I don't know if swearing's okay on your show, but there it is.
You can cuss as much as you want.
I bombed it out. So it became a real spectacle. And all the ideas that I wasn't able to execute in my rock band, like we would do here. So explosions and fire and grinding metal and tape loops, taking tape machines and manipulating them, all the experimental, weird stuff. And if we got an idea, there was a way to make it happen. We would make it happen, and we would do it, and we would try it on stage. And that started to take off. And the other band that I was playing with, the Zeros, they felt a little competitive with that, I think, and they didn't really like it. That band started to take off and get bigger shows, and so at some point, the other guys in that band, they just quit. They just took their party somewhere else.
Did they move farther north or something? Or?
No, they just started another band, and it didn't really go anywhere. And then they ended up, one of them moved back to the city, back to San Francisco, and one of them stayed here to do stuff.
Sure.
And then Hitting Birth took off. And Hitting Birth was sort of a collective, so we had people in and out. And Steve Spirit and I were sort of the main founding members that kind of stuck around. Shortly after that, David Parks joined the band, and he came on as a percussionist, and I was the drummer. And then he took my seat, and I moved out front as a bass player singer. And David Parks plays in a band now called Too Many Zoos. And if you look them up on the internet, you'll see David playing drums and Too Many Zoos. Too Many Zoos is David on drums and then 2 horn players. And he's still doing experimental stuff, although that group is kind of commercially successful, and they're great. They just they're awesome. He's still at it.
So a couple things about that. First off, when you were talking about the electrified shopping cart, which is amazing. I can't wait to tell my 14-year-old about that. Yeah. It reminded me of a band we used to play with in San Francisco when we would go on tour called Chikung. Do you remember Chikung?
Yes, Chikung was a young band from Seattle who came along about 3 or 4 years into us playing shows. They were kind of similar to us in a way. And
I kind of got that. I don't think I got it at the time. Mm-hmm. We were definitely, I mean, I feel like we musically probably missed each other by about 3 or 4 years. Like by the time I was just able to physically get into shows with my ID was when Hitting Birth was already literally legendary. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember Rob and Andrew being all like, dude, this is what it is. And even Carrie was all like, something to the effect of like, Hitting Birth learned us how to do a show. Like we had this huge, like that's how we learned to do shows. And then Carrie ended up doing all that like pyrotechnics and stuff on stage. And I mean, just
we did a lot of
nuts.
that too. There was a lot of explosions and fire in our stage show.
Do you think that you could, and I want to come back to your history real quick, but do you think that you could even pull that off these days?
No.
Not even with the right connections and a couple of buckets of water on stage?
I just don't have any desire to do that. I just don't. Like,
there you go.
I feel like I've done it. And I think it would be a hard sell. You'd have to, maybe you could get away with it at Burning Man or somewhere like that, but most venues would just shit a brick if you were setting off coffee creamer bombs and there was mushroom clouds of fire rolling off of their ceiling above their stage.
Yeah, I feel like we got away with a lot of shit in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that we definitely couldn't get away with these days.
Yeah, I mean, we were shut down by the fire marshal a few times, but for the most part, we knew what we were doing. We were very careful, but we were also very dangerous at the same time, or it seemed very dangerous to the audience, and they loved it. We were shut down once at a big venue here in town at the Melody Ballroom, and then once we played a sort of legendary show in Olympia at Evergreen College, and we played with our friends in Dead Moon, who we'd done a lot of shows with.
Dead Moon, I remember those guys.
Dead Moon were really good friends of ours, and Fred and Tootie owned a music store, and Andrew hung out at Satyricon where we all worked. Everyone in our band pretty much worked there, at least the 3 core players. Oh. Yeah, we were doing a show at Evergreen one time, and we're smoke machines are going. We have grinders sending sparks everywhere, and there's fumes and smoke from that. And then there's like, coffee creamer, smoke pots and flash pots, and there's all kinds of fire and fireworks, and then there's incense burning, And at some point, we filled that whole hall up, and it was a huge venue. We filled it up, and there's also, we have strobe lights and flashing lights and all that stuff. Well, we set off the smoke alarm and the sprinkler alarm. Luckily, it didn't rain down on us, but the fire department showed up, and they see this going on, and they came on. They tried to get us to stop, but like in all the chaos and the smoke and the loud music, we couldn't tell. I didn't know what was going on. I thought, and the audience thought it was part of the show. So they were clapping until the fire department gets on stage and literally grabs our amplifiers with the ends of the wooden butts of their axes and is knocking them off onto the floor and hitting them off to turn them off.
Whoa.
And taking the mics away from us and kicking them to the ground. I mean, they just came on like stormtroopers, just kicking things and knocking things over.
Hey, they have one job to do, my friend, right?
Yeah, they did it. So they stopped us. They cleared all the smoke out, and we waited for them to leave, and we started the show back up again.
Nice.
After that, Dead Moon came on and rocked out. And
nice.
The fans loved it. People are still talking about it to this day, or at least
that super sounds legendary. And for the kids listening, in 1995, it wouldn't be too weird to have somebody show up in a full-on fireman costume at one of our shows. Like, so this is not out of the realm of possibility that it could have been part of the show. Let's take it back before your band in San Francisco. Were you raised with music? Like, did you learn piano first or bass?
I've never had a music lesson, but I was raised around music. My parents played the Beatles records for me when I was a kid, and that just exploded inside my brain. I sort of fell into the dream life of the music. And then when my parents divorced, my mom was a hippie, and she dated a guy and hung out with a guy who drove a truck for the Grateful Dead. And Neil Young was our neighbor. He lived about a quarter of a mile. His property was above ours, about a quarter of a mile. He's up in Sky La Honda, and we're in Half Moon Bay at the time.
Okay.
So between all these music connections, there would be parties at the house where I would meet, like, the bass player of the Allman Brothers, or the drummer of Crazy Horse, or the keyboard player from the Grateful Dead, or what, you know what I mean? So I grew up around music, and
there's a lot going on,
and around music being an important thing in that culture where music was important. I didn't start playing music until the early 80s when punk rock came along, because I never had a lesson. So before punk rock, when I was into like Rivet head music and metal music and hard, Sabbath and Motorhead and stuff like that, that took a skill set. And because I never had any training, no one even ever in those circles would suggest that you could even do something like that unless you're an aficionado. But when punk rock came along, I started going to punk shows. My friends were like, "Oh, dude, anybody can do this. You set up instruments, and then you bang on them, and you learn a couple of chords and and then you start screaming." And yeah, so I started doing that, and I think the first couple shows I did in punk bands, I was the singer in the band. And because I wasn't really that good at it, I would just throw myself on top of the drum kit and climb the amps and jump on the stage and leave the show a bloody mess after about a 20-minute set of fast hardcore music. And that was considered successful. So that was my introduction into music. And then of course, when the punk scene fractured, actually in the early punk scene, we would go to any show that was at the MAB or the On Broadway. So we were there as much as we could possibly go to shows. So sometimes 5 or 6 nights a week, we would be at the MAB or the On Broadway, because if we weren't actually into the band, we would just be hanging out drinking beer in the alleyway out there, or at the arcade next door, or
So this is what, like late teens, early 20s, maybe?
I was in my late teens, early 20s, and this is in the early 80s. So I ended up seeing a lot of bands that I might not have gone to see on purpose. Like, for instance, the Cramps. I don't think I would have, if I heard their records, I would be like, this isn't punk rock. This is weird.
Right. As a kid, I thought the same thing. Yeah.
But again, I got to see them, and later on appreciated that fact. Einstreisende Neubauten, again, an industrial band who was later on very influential in what I did and what Hittingbirth did. The grinding of the sparks and the homemade metallic instruments and treated guitars. But at the time when I saw him, I was like, what is this shit? This isn't punk rock. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted hardcore. Like, I was into the Dead Kennedys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I had big ears and an open mind, and I appreciated what was going on, and I could see the majesty and the power of how they commanded a stage and how they literally scared the shit out of the audience and yet drew them in at the same time. I recognized that art form. And so, yeah, I saw bands. Throbbing Gristle was another one where I was like, I didn't like them at all, but I loved them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like when you saw them live is what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was freaky. I mean, like, what is this shit? What are they doing? Like, it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like as we age and mature and we get wiser, our tastes change in general. I mean, I'm really astounded that you say that you have never had a lesson.
I came at music. There's two ways to come at the music. There's the technical side and studying scales and notes and theory. And then there's the emotional, intuitive side. So I came from it strictly from the emotional, intuitive side, and then slowly started learning the technical stuff by osmosis and being around other talented people and asking, what are you doing? Why are you holding your hand like that? What does that mean? What is a minor?
You know, when I started to do some research on this, and I looked at all like the videos of Hittingbirth and stuff, I was really, I think, surprised because in my mind I didn't think it was as kind of industrial as it really was. And then when I look back at what I was going to say is when I look back at the years when those were produced, I was like, that's like before Nine Inch Nails. Like, I'm like, what was going on? I mean, these guys were like not only like ahead of their time, but I mean, this was happening here.
Well, yes, for Portland, we were definitely ahead of our time, but for the global music scene, it wasn't that revolutionary. We mixed a few things together, which is what made it unique. But at the time, again, Throbbing Gristle, Einstreisen die Neubauten, those bands were ahead of their time, way ahead of us. And we were taking from performances and ideas like that. And there was a band out of San Francisco called the Beatniks, and Michael Fronte, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's popular. He does the sort of hippie rock, conscious folk, rock scene. He's still putting out records.
Wow.
He's got songs on the radio. I hear him on Kink FM once in a while, which is a AAA station for those of you who don't know what that is. It's adult contemporary. He's still active, but when he was younger in the city, he had this band called the Beatniks, and they had a stand-up drummer, and he played bass, and it was sort of funky, tribal, industrial, nasty, punky kind of stuff, and they were very inspiring to me. Yeah, there was 4 or 5 young black dudes from the punk scene, and they just fucking raged the stage, man. They knew how to get down. And I was like, I want some of that. So I would sort of take these ideas. And at the time, when I first moved here in 1988, I went from watching bands play 4 and 5 nights a week at the MAB and the On Broadway to working in a club. The 2 weeks after I got here, I was working at the only punk club here in town. And when I wasn't working, I was down there watching bands. So it's, 5-6 nights a week, I was watching touring acts. So I soaked it up, and I would take the things that I liked from the band. So again, I don't know that Hittingbirth ever really invented anything. I just would put together things that I liked, and I would see somebody do something, and I'm like, wait a second, you're grinding metal on stage, and that looks really cool. But what if you used a 10-inch cutoff wheel and you sent the sparks 40 or 50 feet out over the audience instead of 10 feet above? It would look cooler. It would be more fucking dangerous. And then if you did it on a piece of steel that was welded on a shopping cart, then you could amplify the shopping cart. And so the sound of the grinding would be going through a wah-wah pedal into a delay and making the most horrendous fucking noise. Then it becomes musical and theatrical. So again, I didn't invent grinding sparks. I just adapted it and took it to the next level. And so the same thing with all the stuff that we did.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
Everything that we would do, I would say, well, let's let's take the bass guitar and tune all 4 strings to the same note and then drop it down in pitch. And so again, I don't know that we invented that, but we sure took it to another level.
So how did King Black Acid evolve out of Hitting Birth?
First of all, let me just say that Hitting Birth was constantly evolving in itself. So when you're watching videos, which there's not a lot of videos out there posted on YouTube.
There really isn't.
This is before the video camera was that popular, and most people that would come to the shows, it was too dark and there was too much going on. There'd be 1,400 kids jumping up and down, screaming, and so somebody bringing a video camera into one of those performances. Video cameras were expensive back then, and people were like, no fucking way I'm bringing my video camera into that. It's going to get destroyed,
or my dad's video camera.
Because there's explosions and shit flying everywhere and people jumping around, and the kids would get rowdy. Some of the performances, some of them, they would just be standing there with their mouth open going, what the fuck are these people doing? Because again, there was times when there was like nothing but like 6 people playing percussion on stage and running tape loops. So then we started introducing more melodic instruments. Then we started introducing more heavy tribal industrial grooves, which later on became hip hop music, right? So that tribal industrial funk became hip hop. And so we had that kind of danceable, funky element going on. Two drummers standing up, doing these funky beats that, beat ideas we'd get from old groups like Can and shit like that. and so basically that group evolved, and towards the end we introduced guitars, and it turned into more of a rock band with a sort of industrial metal influence, but with the dancey backbeats. So at the peak of that group in the early 90s is when Nirvana broke. And in fact, we played with Nirvana on New Year's Eve at Satyricon because they were friends of ours. And we played with them right before the Nevermind record came out. That show was kind of legendary because everybody could sense that something was happening with Nirvana and their songwriting and with the music scene in general. Like it was getting ready to burst at the seams, and they are the ones that broke that sort of glass ceiling into the commercial realm. Although bands like Jane's Addiction and the Pixies and all these other bands had kind of like were tapping on that glass for a long time, these guys really went through hardcore. And
plus they were from here too. That was the other, I mean, Pacific Northwest sort of.
They're just normal dudes who hung out in the music scene. There's a lot of men and women, a lot of boys and girls, whatever, that hung out and participated in the music scene back then. Anybody who was a weirdo was welcome.
Right. That's another thing that's kind of different with these days.
Yeah.
Like I remember, and again, I'm not to completely date myself, but I was talking to my daughter about this the other day, and I was all like, there was a time where I was literally afraid to bring a Journey record to school because I was going to get my ass kicked. And she's all, what are you talking about? I'm like, people felt that strongly about music. If you were like had friends that were into metal and you brought some, wimpy album or something, they were going to like kick your ass.
And that brings up a good point is that those of us in the alternative underground, independent, punk, whatever you want to call it, that music scene, the subterranean culture is what I call it. People were very protective. We'd already seen the jocks and the Nazis invade the punk scene, and we didn't want that happening.
That's a good point.
So we were all very protective of each other. If you were queer, if you were of color, if you were a weirdo or whatever, it didn't matter. If you were involved in the alternative, subterranean music scene, you had family. And it wasn't necessarily even a music scene as much as it was a community. And Nirvana was part of that community. They were just some dudes who lived in the next town up, and they hung out with us. They smoked weed with us. They talked about Kiss records, and they talked about punk bands, and they talked about weird, obscure bands like the Vaselines, and we hung out, and we drank beer, we smoked weed, we talked about movies and shit like that, and we hung out, and they'd stay at our house, and they were just one of many people that we hung out with. But this is at a time where things were really changing, the culture was changing, and Nirvana exploded literally out of the scene, and it changed everything. And as that's when it went from a community to a music scene. And then everything fractured and everything went sideways. One of the byproducts of them busting through that glass ceiling is that money flooded into the music community, and all of a sudden you had all these bands trying to sound like Nirvana, trying to sound like a grunge band, trying to look the part, trying to buy the right gear, trying to do the right drugs, trying to say the right things. And it was very disingenuous, and they felt sort of responsible for it. You could tell that, there was a lot of guilt and shame, but they loved playing fucking music. You know what I mean? That's what they set out to do. They didn't do anything bad on purpose. You know what I mean? They're just...
Right. Well, look at what Dave Grohl's done now.
Yeah.
He's had Foo Fighters for decades now.
Yeah.
Just, he loves to play. My point is he loves to play. And
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't really paid that much attention to what he's doing, but I hear his name once in a while. Anyway, yeah. So at that time, when all that money came in, everybody wanted to sign bands, and Hitting Birth got swept up in that signing frenzy. So we got signed to a subsidiary of Capitol Records, and that was sort of the beginning of the end for Hitting Birth, because some of the group wanted to maintain this experimental, theatrical, freak scene kind of vibe. And some of us wanted to learn how to write songs and get played on the radio and make a career out of music and go that direction. So it sort of fractured the band. And as the sort of only remaining founding member, I kept Hitting Birth going up until about 94. Well, while that was still going, I needed an outlet for something else. I needed something that was not a big show, that was not a huge sound, that was not as demanding. I didn't have to rent lights and hire a whole crew and do all this shit. It just got to be a big monster that needed to be fed, and it took a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it started to become a little bit draining. And so I started a side project. My girlfriend at the time, Melinda, had a little keyboard, and she would sometimes sit in with Hitting Birth, and we met this kid walking up the street. Hitting Birth had played with this band Faust from Germany one time, and we had snuck in this kid on the streets in Seattle who was like, "I'm not old enough to get into the show." I'm like, "Whatever, grab that guitar and follow me." So he remembered me, and he saw me after he moved here to go to college, and he's like, "Hey, thanks a lot, man." And he's like, I just live up the street. And it turns out he had a guitar. And I'm like, "Come over to my house and smoke some weed sometime. We'll play guitars." And then I met this other dude at a bookstore who was looking at books about crop circles. And he's like, "Man, I wonder if aliens make crop circles in weed." And I was like, "You're a fucking weirdo, dude. You should come over to my house sometime." And so we just started jamming, and I had this idea for doing a style of music that I called coma core. So it really slow, really melodic. At the time, I was listening to bands like the Spacemen 3, and sort of ambient droney stuff, and some Brian Eno, and moving the opposite direction of the heavy stuff that we were doing. And so that project started to take off. We started playing shows, and at some point, I realized, Hitting Birth played a sold-out show at Satyricon with a new lineup. We were on top of our game. It was the best we'd played in years. I felt so good about what we were doing. I just said, "You know what? I want to stop now while we're on top. That's it.
Oh, wow.
I just want to quit right now." And then I just started focusing on doing King Black Acid. And King Black Acid, I never intended to keep the name King Black Acid. I got booked under my own name, I think one time. It was like Daniel Riddle from Hitting Birth. And I was like, I don't want my name up there because
Daniel Riddle
it
from
just
Hitting
seemed
Birth.
weird. I just didn't, So
Sure,
they're like,
sure.
"Well, okay, we won't use your name. What do you want to call it?" And I'm like, "Call it King Black Acid," because that was kind of like a nickname I had in high school or whatever. And so I never intended for that name to stick, but we kept getting more show offers. So it just kind of stuck.
That's
stuck around.
It's funny. Carrie confessed to me that Jollymon came up with their name because they had a show in 3 days, at what became John Henry's in Eugene. It was
Yeah.
called Club 136 or 316 or something back then.
Yeah.
And he's all like, dude, it was the one that had the least amount of disagreements, and it just stuck.
Yeah.
And here we are. They reunited in 2016. I mean, amazing, huh?
Yeah. Still rocking the
So
spot.
King Black Acid was a nickname from, like, did somebody lovingly give you that nickname, or?
Jokingly, my friend who was a DJ at the radio station in Los Altos Hills called KFJC, which by the way, I don't know if it is now, but at the time it was the premier station for underground, subterranean, punk rock, industrial, goth, glam, like anything that was alternative and weird. You would hear it on KFJC long before you would hear it anywhere else. So on the West Coast, that was the satellite station for culture. You know, this is pre-internet, all
Oh,
that.
sure, yeah.
So people would ask me to record the radio, record shows, and send them cassettes of DJs on KFJC.
Sure.
So my friend was a DJ at that station, and him and I used to take psychedelics together, and he would go, come over to my house, and he would turn me on to all this music. I would bring the psychedelics, he would bring the music, and so because I would bring certain psychedelics to him, he's like, oh, you're King Black Acid, whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
That's awesome,
So
yeah.
it became the nickname,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh, that would be a funny band name someday.
And it just stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's nice.
Yeah.
So you also have a record label too.
Yes.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
My label's called Mazinga, starting with an M, ending with an A. So Mazinga Records. This is Mazinga Studios.
Oh,
So-
we're in Mazinga Studios right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I partner up with Cavity Search Records. And for those who don't know Cavity Search, they put out the first Elliott Smith solo record. And they've done bands like Pete Krebs, Hazel, Heat Miser, Atomic 61, King Black Acid. You know, they've put out most every King Black Acid record. And they've been a joy to work with. And Denny Swafford, excuse me, took over Cavity Search years ago. His partner Christopher passed away, and I continue to work with him closely. And when I decided to start my own label, we partnered up, and so we consult together and we work together. And he takes on certain things, and I do certain things. And so I've signed a couple acts. And by signed, I use the term loosely because nobody signs bands like they do in the old days. It's not like, oh, here's your money, now you work for us type of thing.
And you're
It's more like,
massively in debt for the rest of your life.
yeah, this is not fractional reserve banking. I am not a bank. I don't loan people money. I help curate art. That's what I do.
Beautiful, man.
So
That's
I'm not
beautifully
trying
put.
to enslave anybody. I'm trying to help disseminate their art to the rest of the world. And so I help curate. So I work with acts like Queen Chief, and I put out King Black Acid records.
So what does that look like? I mean, do you basically do like the duplication? Like you have connections with duplication, and then do you
It depends on the project.
distribution?
Usually it's the distribution part.
Okay.
It's the distribution and promotion, and giving the group a home base and somebody to consult with, and somebody to reflect ideas off of, who's, because between Denny and I, we've been putting out records for quite a few years.
And it's funny because when you're the one creating your own record, it's so incubated and you're so close to it that you can't see and not just a producer change, like put a guitar over here or do this thing over here. It's like, it's become so much of your own art. I mean, we've spent the last almost about a year and a half putting out a new record that's been, 19 years since this incarnation's been together.
Yeah.
And I don't say that it's difficult, but I can see the huge benefit of having somebody who's a third party, just an outsider, who genuinely loves music and doesn't have a weird financial interest in it, like you would think of the typical record company like you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? Who can see the different things and see different ways to go, which is probably a great segue into the question of distribution. Like, how are records distributed these days?
It's interesting because if you ask me that question tomorrow, my answer would probably be different because things change that fast. But right now, the way things are distributed is predominantly through digital. and predominantly through streaming and free platforms. So records are not distributed so much for pay anymore because nobody's buying records, because all you have to do is have one person buy your record and then it's up on the internet for free everywhere.
Right.
So basically what we do is we just manage the outlets. We don't try to stop pirating. We don't try to stop people from giving the stuff away. That genie's out of the bottle. So what we do is we try to get it to as many sources as possible, everywhere from Spotify, Pandora, which our platform would be CD Baby. We go through CD Baby
for the distribution deals
to
with
distribute.
those. Okay.
And they sort of have tentacles in a lot of different places. And where they don't cover, then we step in and cover ourselves. YouTube, Vimeo, and all these sort of streaming platforms. Some of them are paid platforms where the customer pays a few cents to set up their own stations, like a radio station. And some of them are free, like YouTube. You got to put up with commercials if you do that. And again, nothing has changed in the sense that, like, instead of some schmarmy, coked out LA dude saying, I'm going to make you rich, here's some money, and then, milking the band for millions or thousands or whatever of all their resources, it's not done like that. Now it's these corporations like Spotify and Pandora, and what they do is you give them your music for free. Actually, you pay money to your distributor to network with these people, and then people stream your music. They pay money to stream your music so that they can not have advertising, or those companies sell advertising. And what they do is they pay like a fraction of a penny per play. So for every $100 they make off of you, you will see less than $1. And so that hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's a better ratio than I thought. When we got back together in 2014, I did do the whole sort of soup to nuts, if you will, distribution channels, mostly through CD Baby, but through another one called DistroKid.
Oh, okay.
So I used DistroKid, and it really came down to, like, I think I just liked their reporting better. Like, they seem to have a little more integrity around. Of course, look, we come from a different time, right? Like, I never wanted to be signed, but I wanted to have a physical record, some kid could come up and pay $10 for, and that's just kind of, how you did it, or a cassette tape or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just kind of the way I was sort of raised with it. Yeah, that's pretty good, because we had, I did it soup to nuts, right? I did the whole, like, sort of uploading it and put up the two records, and I think we have like 2,500 listens throughout the whole kind of a thing. And it's almost kind of like the Ferris Bueller's Day Off thing. We're like, well, if I just leave it up on my computer running all the time, do you think that I would get more downloads? And I'm like, guys, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. It's the same thing as putting the car up on blocks and putting it in reverse. Like, they have your IP address. You've got one listen to. I even tried to figure out what the royalty was on YouTube if you went 1 second over the halfway mark of an actual, like, song or whatever. Because that was the first thing I did, is I took each individual song from our albums, the Elemental Records one, which we ended up kind of getting at the end of the day, and the one that we had done ourselves, and then I individually put those songs up on YouTube. And is that kind of like something you guys would typically manage?
We do manage the metadata, and we manage the locations where they're going, the platforms, the metadata and the platforms. And then it depends on what the client wants, or what our partners want, Typically, most artists, they just want their music to be heard. Nobody's trying to make $1 million. Nobody that I know of, anyway. I mean, Katy Perry is trying to make $1 million, and good for her.
Right.
But that's weaponized music. That's a whole nother genre. That's a whole nother thought pattern. That's a whole nother idea. What we're doing is creating original content, curating original art, and creating inner guided music. So it becomes a spiritual endeavor, and it becomes an artistic endeavor, and it becomes a passion play long before it becomes a financial endeavor. It's really more about how much money can I afford to spend so people can hear my music. That's really the question you got to
Right.
ask yourself.
Right. And it does come down to all that. Even before we even got back together, we were another band in another incarnation. And I mean, for like 8 years before today, I've had a studio in Salem. And I mean, whatever, it cost me $200 a month. I mean, but you can't put a price on playing music, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried with other people up here and I'm like, it's cool, but it's like, I got kids and stuff, and I'd much rather have it be an incubated thing with people I care about, that I just get that vibe. I mean, I fucking watch and I'm just all like, I'm not just following the notes. This is like a counter melody to what this guy is doing. And it just happens to be this weird delay driven guitar, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That's a little heavier and harder and stuff, but I get it, man. And that's a weird, it would almost be like getting married at 60 if I was to join another band right now, because that's just, I'm with you. You can't really put a price on it. And you're blessed to have such this beautiful studio in your home, man. I mean, this is really cool.
Yeah, I am. I've worked really hard and accumulated a lot of energy, a lot of vacuum tube amplifiers, a lot of old microphones. And there's nothing in here per se that's like, some sort of gem that's worth $1 million or anything. It's just little pieces of gear that I like, little Casio keyboards that I've had that I picked up at a garage sale or on tour somewhere, little Omnichords, the Baldwin Fun Machine. None of these things are expensive per se, but they're very valuable tools to me for creating and for for fleshing out the ideas. And you brought up a good point. There is a value in the creative process in itself. Just getting together with some of your brothers and sisters, some of your friends, whoever, to create original content. There's a magic in that. There's an ethereal majesty that is unquantifiable, and it's palpable. It's powerful as fuck. And it can be very addictive too. It can be addicting to get lost into the dream life of the song. And then there's taking that out and sharing it with other people. That's a whole nother level. Some people are just happy jamming with their friends on the weekends, or in fact every single night when they come home from work, getting a jam together. That's completely legit. And then there's like taking it to the stage and sharing it with other people. Then as players, when you're playing music together, and especially if you're playing inner-guided music, creating original content, and what you're doing is each player becomes a component. When you plug them in together, you get them in close approximation to each other, then these players start to feed off of each other, start to exchange information sort of magnetically, psychically, and you can create a component. You take that component and you plug it in on a stage in front of other people, and you're feeding off the energy of the audience. They're feeding off the energy of your music, and you create a larger component. And when you become part of a large component like that, and all that energy is cycling through you, it is healing, it is empowering. It's a lot of responsibility. It's magical, and it's beyond definition, and that's why people do it. I mean, I can attempt here to allude to what it really is.
Well, a lot of people will say it's spiritual, and I think that's still cheapening what you're talking about, of that level of just an understanding that sort of transcends a lot of things that we just talk about. And look, we just give labels to things just for us as humans to even understand them. So, grindcore, hot as fuck, whatever, we're just kind of doing it. And so I'm with you. I mean, there's and the money thing is a small price to pay for being able to have, the guys that I can kind of be with and create this. And so I love two things about what you said. Number one, I like the fact that there's the distinction between kind of, I'm just here at Sunday, I'm kind of doing it, versus taking that incubated incarnation and putting it up on a stage. Mm-hmm. Because, the guitar player and I, we never stopped. We just kept going into other bands, doing other things, but it was never quite as popular in the sense of a draw of people than Henry's Child was. because we come from the whole elemental floater, Jollymon, sweaty nipples camp, right?
Yeah.
We had big shoes to fill. So there's a lot of expectations for us. And I'll tell you what, man, I missed it over the years in those other bands. And we didn't know what was going to happen in 2014, but we went and we rehearsed all these old songs. We're like, we weren't even sure if anybody was going to show up. And we sold out the Wow Hall by the first band. So we're like, clearly there is a distinction that I was missing in my life before this. And this is 2014. You know, we just gathered 10 songs, and it was a complete accident, us even getting together. We were filling in for another band that was like going to, you know, kind of do the thing. Suddenly pre-sale tickets were through the roof, and the guys are like, oh shit, we need to switch places with you. And, you know, I'm kind of glad they did.
Yeah.
No offense, but I'm kind of like going back to this is like, I'm with you. There's, when you mix in that energy from that crowd, it's really important. It's really important. And, it definitely adds to it, and it creates something that is unique to that situation and allows us to be very present in that moment to what's occurring in that moment. Because we talk about those legendary shows like that. I'll tell you what, 1995 or early 96, we played one of the bartenders at Satyricon's birthday. And we were so...
Bruno.
What's that?
That would be Bruno.
Bruno? Okay, I don't remember much because I had just joined Henry's Child, right?
Yeah.
And so I was kind of the new kid, and I'm 8 years younger than all those dudes. So like I'm obviously like kind of a little more naive too, right?
Yeah.
But we were very blessed. Like he was like, dude, I want you guys to come play, you know, my birthday party. And was super stoked, you know, and it was just back when I remember they had like the latrine in the bathroom, right?
Yep.
Like the whole, you know, just, I mean, that was a freak show, but I loved it because it kind of reminded me of John Henry's down in Eugene and was just kind of, and that was really home. And I remember seeing that Nirvana and Hitting Birth poster in like, it was either in a frame or it was somehow or another sort of, the distinction I remember it, Daniel, was it was kind of behind the bar. Maybe kind of up where the alcohol is kept, where they kind of have like those lights, you know, that sort of show. And I was just like, damn, that was like, because Hitting Birth I'd already seen, you know, a couple times and been like, oh my God, those guys are just fucking crazy, man, you know, kind of a thing. And to see that, I was like, wow, this is really cool. There's just a combination of that and those guys being, because we were just from Eugene. I mean, we were some other band or whatever. And he liked us so much. He's like, dude, I want you to come up and play my party. I just remember that being like, another contributing factor to this ebb and flow that we feel as musicians, as artists, who generally, it's just what we do. So I noticed that King Black Acid has had many iterations over many different years.
Yeah.
And there's different names that go along with these incarnations.
Yes.
So there's like Womb Orchestra.
The Womb Star Orchestra.
Womb Star Orchestra and Crystal Unicorn.
Yep. King Black Acid and the Crystal Unicorn.
Uh-huh.
King Black Acid and the Sacred Heart.
Are those like different people, or are they different?
Usually, yeah.
Different personalities
Sometimes
you might have?
there's one or two people that will spill over from one lineup to the next. But yeah, usually it's a different lineup or a different vibe, or we'll switch up stuff. We'll make it something. Some of those records are more rock. Some of them are more ambient. Some of them are recorded just for a movie soundtrack. So yeah, the subtitle of the band sort of delineates the fact that it's doing something a little bit different than the previous project.
So one of the things that I've found that I've recently been struggling with is getting live performances. And it seems to me that I don't want to cheapen a booking agent or cheapen not a booking agent, but somebody at a club that books. Because somebody who works at a club that books, they probably have like 5 other jobs that they do there. They probably wash dishes. They probably serve food. And they just happen to be the booking agent, right? And so I wish that there was in my mind of like I work in IT. So everything is very logical and it's very like regimented. There would seem to be that there would be a template or a way that I could kind of just get shows in general that would work. But I find it very, very difficult to get shows outside of the places where I can guarantee that I'm going to sell a bunch of tickets.
Well, there's a reason for that, and that is because we live in a time where there are so many venues, so many young artists. There's so many people have moved to the Northwest here. It's flooded. And when you flood something out like that, it becomes very competitive. And in a youth-driven market, which the music market is very youth-driven, what happens is if you go away and you take a nap for 5 minutes and you come back, people are like, "Who the fuck are you?" So
That's so true.
So and again, the same people that were going to shows in the 90s or the early 2000s or the late mid 2000s, whatever, they're not active. And the same with the people that play music. I came up being around a lot of musicians and bands, and you would be working next to somebody who was like the hottest band in San Francisco, or the hottest band in Seattle, or the hottest band in Portland. And I would look at them as a musician who is as a lifer, and I've known for many years that I'm a lifer, and I just have to play music. I'd look at them and I'd be like, "You're on top right now, but 3 years from now, you're going to be working at your dad's insurance firm selling auto insurance, and you won't own any instruments, and you won't give a shit about any of this, and no one will give a shit about you and your stupid fucking band." I mean, I'm being sarcastic. I don't mean that to be bitter, but like I have respect for anybody that will play music, even for the hobby rockers and the part-timers and all that stuff. It keeps the scene going. But so there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of transient, morphic energy moving in and out of the music scene, and so it is hard to book consistently. And booking bands is kind of a thankless job, and people don't do it for very long. And the people that do it for long periods of time usually get very bitter and very worn down and very jaded and very wrapped up in the politics and the bullshit. It's not a sustainable lifestyle.
Right.
So you kind of have to treat these people with a sort of loving respect and patience. And what I end up doing is I just usually end up booking my own shows. And when I book at a venue, I try to just rent the venue for the night rather than try to explain to them who we are and what we're doing. You'd think that 20 years of selling out shows in your hometown that people would know who you are. But still, I run into booking agents that have no idea. They're like, "What is the name of your band? Was that black metal music?" I'm like, "No, it's rock music. It's psychedelic, ambient, spacey pop music," or whatever. They're like, "I don't know. Never heard of you guys." I'm like, "Oh, well."
Okay, funny. I thought it was us that just took 19 years off.
Yeah. And I'm like, "Well, there's a club 6 blocks away from you. We play there every other month and we sell it out. Can we play in your venue?" You're like, "Oh, I don't know." Well, yeah. So it's a weird, the music community and the music scene overlap each other, and they're both very strange in that sense that it's sort of it's a youth-driven market, and there's a lot of transients, and it's a strange place to do your art, and you just have to be patient with it and understanding. Try to do your best to just maintain.
Thank you for that. You leveled my sanity, and I'm just gonna breathe a sigh of relief because I'm with you. I kind of thought it might be oversaturated, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
The music market is very oversaturated, and I don't know what the fucking point I was gonna make there was. What were we talking about?
Just hanging in there. I think you were just encouraging me to keep at it.
Yeah, I probably had some sort of point. It was probably totally brilliant.
As in most of your music, my friend.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you can't take any of this shit too seriously. You know what I mean? If you like to make art, you can't take the booking agents. You can't take the other bands. You can't take any of that stuff too seriously. You have to do what you love and hope that it becomes contagious to other people that appreciate that what you're doing is inner guided. There's always going to be people out there that want to be, popular in the music scene and want to be associated with something that's youthful and sexy and that makes money, and those people come and go. But if you're creating original content, and if you're working from the heart, and you're not consumed with what's going to be popular, what's the new keyboard sound? What's the new way that people dress on stage? Fuck the dumb shit. You fuck all that stuff because it's all temporary and it's all going to be passé tomorrow. If you're doing something that's inner guided, if you're doing something that's authentic, then your enthusiasm will become contagious to the people that matter. And it doesn't matter if you're playing to 2 people, 3 people, or 3,000 people, as long as you're doing inner guided music. And if you're not, then you're creating something that's not sustainable, and it's going to be a fucking boat anchor at some point, and it will kill you. Anybody who's watched those old VH1s, Where Are They Now documentaries, it's the same fucking story. Oh, and I sniffed a yacht, and I sniffed a Cadillac, and I drank a swimming pool full of vodka, and my life was a bummer, and I lost all my money, and people stole everything from me, and now I'm playing at the fairgrounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, fuck all that. You know, I'm just, that's not why I'm into music, and I'm not trying to sell 1 million records. I'm not trying to be the most popular kid on the block. I'm not trying to meet cute girls from ripping on guitar leads on stage or what, impress my friends, or I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I got music in my heart, and I just want to get together with other people that are like-minded, and if people get that and people want to come share that experience, then great. And if the booking agents don't get it, if the people selling records don't get it, if I'm not popular on the Facebooks or whatever, then fine. Fuck all that. I'm still doing this because I love making music.
Yeah.
I love creating original content, and I love working with other people that do that. This is why I work with bands on my label, you know?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I record and I produce other bands, and I do film score work and soundtrack work and whatever work when you know, whatever I can get when I can get it, you know?
Nice.
And I mostly do independent projects because it's usually more authentic. It's a lot less money and sometimes no money at all. But again, yeah, I don't mind that.
Nice.
So.
Nice. So when is the next King Black Acid show? You have anything booked right now?
Nothing booked right now. Nope. We're going to take the fall and winter of 2018 to write new songs, work on new recordings, perhaps work in new members. Because again, something I took from Hitting Birth that I use in King Black Acid is we run the group as a collective. So people are allowed to come and go. And right now we're looking for another keyboard player and or somebody else. I don't know what it is, but we're looking for another player to come in. So we'll do that over the winter and work on new recordings and then start playing again in the spring. And we're working on a music video that'll be out at some point. Yeah, just keeping busy.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Had a good time talking music with you.
Thanks for coming over and hanging out.
Hey guys, Tom here. Thanks for making it this far, and I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Daniel Riddle of King Black Acid. As you can tell, we have a lot more in common than we don't have in common. Like I said, Daniel's a sharp dude, and this was a lot of fun to sit down in his studio and see how his magic is made, because that's really, really what it's all about. It's all about creation. It's all about getting out there and having integrity and authenticity around your music, and that's one thing that I thought Daniel represented, so I was very excited to bring that to you on that level. So thank you again for listening, and thanks, Daniel, for sitting down with me to have this conversation. Just really quick, I wanted to go over a few things and some dates for you. So tonight, September 21st, which is a Friday, Henry's Child is playing with the Shrike at Bombs Away Cafe in Corvallis. And then on Saturday, September 22nd, we're playing with a band called Bullets and Octane. And for both shows, we're playing full sets. Then, next Thursday, which is going to be September 27th, Henry's Child is opening up for Floater down at the Hi-Fi in Eugene. So if you can make all 3 shows, that would be super awesome, and we would love to see you in person. as we sort of kick off the new school year, I should say, and get ready for more and more great things. You know, our records are going to be coming out soon, and we're also going to be having some surprise merch for these shows. So I'm super excited to share that with you guys as well. If you haven't already, please go to wherever you get your podcasts, specifically Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, and hit the subscribe button so that way you can get all of these episodes going directly to your mobile device at any given time. And you can always reach out to us through our website, henryschild.com. Thank you so much again for listening, and I appreciate your presence and I appreciate your participation in what makes this music so special. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.